Happy Memorial Day weekend. You too, Pastor. Okay. Well, at least we're on the same page. I want to remind you, just like Trey did, and I did also for the first service, this weekend, while you're doing your grilling, while you're doing your pooling and everything else that you might be doing, don't forget to take a few minutes to consider and to think about all of those men and women who have sacrificed, who have given their lives so that we can live in a place like we do and enjoy the freedoms that we have. I know it's easy for all of the events and the days off and things like that to overshadow what this weekend is really about, but we should never lose sight of those who sacrificed. And so don't forget that this weekend. Take a few minutes to think about it. Also, before I jump into today's message, I want to remind you that, we provide for you guys free quarterly devotionals. So June 1st is coming up on Tuesday, so that's when your devotional starts. You can grab one of these out in the foyer, the main connector. Anywhere you see a wall display, there should be a basket with some of these in there. Like I said, they're free. You take those, and you can even take a few if you have friends or family who would want one as well. So again, those are available. And then the second thing is I want to just say thank you to our church. Last week, I mentioned an opportunity that we as a church have in partnering up with James Jacob, who is our church planner in India. He had contacted me and said, hey, obviously you may have seen on the news all of the COVID stuff really hitting them hard right now. He says, we have need to get our pastors and their wives vaccinated, but unlike here, you can't get it free there, so it costs them anywhere from $15 to $50 US to get a vaccine, depending on which one is available. And so we put the challenge out there. If you could donate toward that, to please do so. And several of you overwhelmingly have given. You've been extremely generous, and so we want to say thank you for that. I think of last check, we were around the $2,400 mark, so I want to say a quick thank you for that. But we thought about cutting that off past Thursday. It is still open and available to receive donations if you'd like to do that even today. You can just go online or on our app through the giving portal, and you'll find that the drop-down menu there where you give will have a line that says Jesus for India. Choose that and then give whatever it is you have in mind to give. And that's always an option. You can do that any time of the year, but also with our orphan outreach in Haiti. There's a lot of different options there, so that's not going to go away. But just know that at least through today, any gift that's given towards Jesus for India is going to be going directly to provide pastors and their wives vaccinations there. So we want to get that to them as quickly as possible. So go ahead and give today if you would. But thank you for those who've already done that. As Trey mentioned, we are in our final week of our series that we've called Blueprint. We've been talking about how to develop a blueprint for a godly life. And I mentioned over the last several weeks, whether you're remodeling or you're under new construction, maybe you're putting an addition on the house or just maybe some renovations, you know how important it is to have some sort of blueprint. Some kind of idea, some kind of drawing or a schematic. Listen, it could be anything as detailed as a professionally sketched blueprint or something that you scribbled out on a napkin. But you have to have something to go by. Or else, whatever it is that you build may in the end look nothing like what you intended to build, what you had envisioned in your mind. See, that's it. Everything that we seek to build or everything that we seek to construct or reconstruct starts out as a dream. Just a thought in our mind of what could be, what it might look like in the end. And I know there's plenty of times, and I've done it myself, where I've looked at other people's lives, their Christian life, and I think, man, it must be nice. They're really such a godly person. They have such integrity and strong character. Man, that'd be nice to have a life like that. Starts out as a dream, starts out as a thought. But what we found is that especially in the two wisdom books of Psalms and Proverbs, here in the Old Testament is that God gives us a very detailed blueprint or description of how to achieve that. How to make that dream of a godly life become a reality for us. Isn't that great? And all we have to do is just open it up and dive in, and we find on every page godly counsel and wisdom on how to build this incredible godly life. And whether you're talking about how to win against the battle of worry, how to use our words in an appropriate way, if we're talking about how to handle attacks, whether they're coming from peers or coworkers or family members, or it's a spiritual attack, it's all right here in the book of Proverbs and in the book of Psalms. There's also a lot in there about finances, which is one of the major topics that we didn't get the opportunity to cover in this series, but it's all there and more. So, as I usually say, if you've missed out on any of these weeks, make sure you go online, and if you go to our YouTube channel, they are all there together under the Blueprint series. But as we bring this to a close today, I want to jump back to the book of Proverbs. We've been sort of back and forth between it and the book of Psalms. But we're going to go out today on Proverbs chapter 24. And I want to talk to you about a very important issue, which is how to turn a house into a home. How to turn a house into a home. Back in 2018, Jessica and I, we sold our first home. And I think back about that place and the time that we spent there. That was the place where we began our married life together. We bought that house just before we got married in March. We bought it in November of that year. The next year in March, we moved in. And we began our life as a new couple. That was the house that we brought our kids home to from the hospital. That was the house that some years later, our marriage seemed like it was falling apart. And disaster was just in front of us. It was also there in that place that we put it back together. There was a lot that went on within those four walls. There was a lot of memories built there. We bought that house with the intention of living there, say 5 to 7 years, and then maybe moving somewhere else or building somewhere else. 15 years later, we sold it. That same November, we closed on a new house that was being constructed. See, we had spent probably a year or more looking for another place. Something that was already built, something that we might need to remodel, or just some land that was available to build a new house. We even thought about building on some family land, but nothing seemed to work out. Every avenue, every little turn we took, it seemed to come to nothing. It was so frustrating. Until 2018. It was about midsummer, and we were about to head off to vacation when a construction friend of mine here in the church actually said, I have just started, cleared a lot, and have just begun to dig the footings and pour those on a new house. When you get back off vacation, you come see me, and let's see if this might be something that you'd be interested in. Great location, only a mile here from the church, and I mean, at first thought, this is going to be great. So we went, we enjoyed our vacation, came home, and he showed us the drawings, the blueprints. He showed us the renderings, what this house would sort of look like once it was completed. And I'm telling you, as soon as we laid eyes on this house, we knew it. This was the place for us. We are staring at our new house. And so we agreed to purchase the house while it was still under construction. And the really neat thing is, being so close, we would go by just about every day and look at the progress that was being made. And we'd take the kids by at least a couple times a week, or at least on the weekend, to let them see what the new house looked like and how everything was coming together. Man, they loved it. Kids just running through this house, just nothing but plywood floors at the time. And they would squeeze themselves through the studded walls from room to room and just running around crazy. And, Elin saying, this is going to be my room, and the other one saying, this is going to be my room, and they're back and forth. Jessica and I would take Sharpies, and we'd write things on the studs and on the floors. We'd write scriptures. We'd let the girls, draw things, and they would write scriptures in their rooms and things like that. So we just had a big time of it. But at that time, it was just a house. That's all it was. Over the last 2.5 years, we've been working tirelessly to make it a home. And you know what's funny? Is on the rare occasion that we drive by our old place, not to minimize the memories that we made there, it was a great place, but it's just a house. See, it's not home anymore. How do you turn a house into a home? You might be wondering, what's the difference? Aren't those the same thing? No, they're definitely not. They're completely different. You could spend some time online today if you wanted to, and you would find all kind of little catchy statements that would point out the differences between a house and a home. I took some time and did that several weeks ago, and I found one that really caught my eye. It was sort of a bullet point kind of comparison between a house and a home. The reason it caught my eye is because it's in bullet points. That's my life in a nutshell. Everything's by bullet point, That's how I live every day. So that's why it got my attention. But it described a house as simply a permanent structure, a dwelling in which people live. It also pointed out that a house is still a house even if no one's living there. But a home is something entirely different. A home is a place where you dwell. A home is a place where you feel like you belong, a place that is safe, is comfortable. A home, and this is what I loved about it, a home can be anywhere. The location isn't important. A home can be anywhere so long as you're with the people that you love. That's striking. Unfortunately, and this may be the experience of some here this morning, bickering, infighting, negative put-downs, and those piercing stares, blaring TVs and video games, sour attitudes, dishes being stacked to the ceiling, slammed doors, and feelings of loneliness and isolation have got many of us feeling like it's not home. We feel like it's anything but home. And we find ourselves searching for any reason to stay away or to get away. Home's supposed to be that place where you can't wait to get to. But I'd be willing to bet there's a few of us, the way we feel at home is we can't wait to get away from it. And you're wondering, can that change? Is there anything that can be done about that? You see, here's the good news. There is something that you can do. Things can change. Your house can become a home, and there is a whole host of specific variables that we could talk about, but I just want to point out 3 of them in Proverbs chapter 24 in 2 very simple sounding verses. Verses 3 and 4, Solomon says, this is how you turn a house into a home. By wisdom, a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Through knowledge, its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. Now, I'm reading from the NIV. Your translation may be a little bit different, but it uses the word house. By wisdom, a house is built. The word house there in the Hebrew is the word bayit. It's a very broad term. It's actually one of the most commonly used words in all of the Hebrew language. And it can refer to anything from a house, a very simple structure, to a nation. If you've spent much time reading in the Old Testament, you might have noticed a recurring phrase, the house of Israel, referring to the nation. It's the very same word as we're reading here. But again, this is a broad term. Could refer to a house like a structure. It could refer to a nation, or it could refer to what we're talking about today, a place that's home. And when we use the word home, we're talking about more of a state of mind than we are a structure. And so here Solomon gives us a few characteristics of what we would call a home and how to build it. He says, first of all, it's built by wisdom. Verse 3, by wisdom a house is built. As we go through these, you're going to notice that each one of these elements has two parts to it. The first here that we come to is this idea of wisdom, something that we've been talking about now for several weeks. Wisdom is a recurring theme all throughout the book of Proverbs. And in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 2, Solomon even stated in his own way why he was writing this book. And one of the reasons or the purposes for Proverbs is, verse 2, for attaining wisdom. The Hebrew word for wisdom there, and forgive me if you actually know Hebrew and can speak it better than I do, is chakmah. It's referring to the skill, the shrewdness, the prudence, discernment, the ability to look at a situation, to look at life in general, not from a human perspective, but from more of a godly, divine perspective. It's like you're on a different level. You're getting sort of the bird's eye view, the insider's look. It's a word that Solomon uses over 41 times in the book of Proverbs. And we defined it last week in our message, Living with Enthusiasm, as the ability to look at life, to look at our circumstances, to look at life's challenges and so on from God's viewpoint. The ability to really see what's going on instead of what is just on the surface. You see, I counsel couples all the time who find themselves at each other's throat and on the verge of divorce because of surface issues. Jessica and I, we were one of those couples one time. We were at each other, and we were at wit's end. We were on the verge of divorce over surface issues. Now, I'm not saying that some of these surface issues aren't severe, but they're not the real issues. And it wasn't until we sat down with our counselors and them being full of wisdom and godly insight helped us to see that what we were fighting about wasn't really what we were fighting about. What we thought were the issues were simply the symptoms of the issues. The sickness lie below or beneath the surface. And they helped us discover what that was. You see, wisdom refuses to skate across the surface and ignore or deny the underlying problems. Wisdom penetrates and looks beneath. It looks below. And you wonder, well, how do I develop that ability? I mean, that would be great. That's helpful, right? Well, the Bible tells us how we attain wisdom. In James, God invites us. He says, listen, if you lack wisdom, just ask me, and I will give it to you. One of the primary ways that God imparts wisdom into our lives is through His Word. But see, we've just been sort of catered to, and we've been taught that, you know, if you're looking for something, if you're looking for information, if you're looking for insight, if you're looking for understanding, if you're looking for knowledge, whatever it is, I mean, what do? If you want to know how to do something, you're looking for information, where do you go? You know, just say it. You Google it. You go online. It's like everything you could ever want to know is right there at the tip of your fingers. The problem is, you can't get wisdom online. You get wisdom on high from God. It doesn't come from Google. God says you have to come to me for that. You have to go to my word for that. And you see, I think that's one of the primary reasons why throughout the book of Proverbs that wisdom is personified. It's spoken of as if it's an individual. It's a person. Wisdom is talked about in chapter 1 of Proverbs as calling out in the streets. She's making her voice known. She's calling out loud for anyone who would come and follow her, listen to her advice, and take her counsel. Proverbs 1, verse 2 again, that we read a moment ago, Solomon said, I'm writing these things for those who are attaining or would like to attain wisdom. Other translations put it this way, to know wisdom. And he's not talking about to know it like you're just gathering information or you're memorizing facts and figures. He's speaking of knowledge in the form of experience. To know wisdom like you would know a friend. To know wisdom like you would know your spouse. To know wisdom like you would know your kids. To know wisdom is in essence then to know God. Well, how do we know God? Through a relationship with His Son, Jesus. Which is interesting because Paul describes Jesus this way in Colossians chapter 2, verse 3, that in whom or in Jesus are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24, he writes this, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God, and you can add here, Christ is the wisdom of God. You want to know wisdom? You want to know God? You have to have a relationship with Jesus. You want to turn a house into a home? You have to start with a relationship with Jesus. By wisdom, a house is built. See, that helps me understand a little more what Solomon was writing in Psalm 127, verse 1, where he says, unless the Lord builds a house, and who is He? He's wisdom. Unless the Lord builds a house, its builders labor in vain. Without a relationship with Christ, all of our efforts, all of our plans to turn a house into a home are simply going to be frustrated. They're going to fail. They're going to be futile and fruitless. Only by wisdom is a house built. And that's an interesting word. Because here Solomon's not only referring to new construction. When we think about building something, usually our minds race to something from the ground up. By wisdom, a house is built. But this particular word also includes the idea of reconstruction or restoring. We call it remodeling. There might be some of us in here, especially if you're young, you're not married yet, you don't have a place of your own, you haven't started a family or anything. For you, this may be more about sort of laying the foundational pieces of building a godly home at some point in the future. But most of us in here are thinking about it from the perspective of, we've already got something built. Now, we can be totally honest and transparent. It ain't perfect. And there's a lot of improvements that need to be made. Well, that's where we need to focus today. Is there something about your home that needs to be reconstructed? Is there some remodeling at home that needs to be undertaken? Is there some attitudes that need to change? Does our relationship with Christ need to become more of the focal point in our home? Is there a recommitment to our relationship with Him that needs to be made. You see, that's where turning a house into a home begins. It begins by, looking at things, understanding what's going on at home, responding to situations from His perspective. That leads us to the second element here where Solomon mentions that a home is a place that's established by understanding. It's built by wisdom. Number two, it's established by understanding. This is the second part of verse 3 here. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it's established. So you see, again, the sort of two-part components here. Understanding, if you will, is like the ingredient. Being established is the result. You'll notice also how these are progressive. In other words, one leads to the other, one stacks upon the other or builds upon the other. You begin with wisdom, with a relationship with Christ, sort of getting a godly viewpoint and perspective. And to that, you add to it understanding. Understanding, again, is that ability to respond in the right way. To not only be able to see what's going on, what the real issues are, to see them from God's perspective, but to respond to them in that way, with God's perspective, with His influence. Let's make this very practical. We haven't talked about finances in this series. We'll get to that later on this year, but let's take money, for example. There are a lot of families, a lot of couples who are spending a lot of time and energy fussing and fighting, arguing about money. It's sort of an ongoing point of contention at home. It's an area that seems to continually disrupt lives and rob home of peace. If we would approach our financial situations and that issue with some insight gained from wisdom, godly wisdom from Scripture, what we learn here about how to use money, how to approach our finances, and then we respond to that. We take action on that issue, again, from a godly perspective, using godly counsel and godly principles. We might just find that money's not the issue. It's just a symptom of the issue. What we might discover is that the real issue, the one that's beneath the surface, is a lack of contentment. It could be that the real issue is our felt need to compete. We think we always have to keep up with somebody else. The real issue might be jealousy. The underlying problem may simply come down to poor management. It's not a matter that we don't have enough money. It's just that we're poorly managing the money we have. Through understanding, a home can be established. What's that mean? Well, established means to be made stable, to be secure, to be set up or arranged in order. It gives you this idea that things are out of balance. That life, home, or this issue in life is sort of off kilter, as we say. It's twisted. It's falling over. Understanding, being able to respond to a situation from a godly perspective and using godly principles enables us to firmly secure and stabilize whatever it is that is leaning. Again, it could be a relationship, it could be the finances, it could be, raising our kids, whatever it is. It could be just home life in general. It could be made more secure. Think about that for a second. Wouldn't that make home a much more pleasant place to be? Wouldn't home then become a much more relaxing, stress-free kind of a place when we're focusing on our closeness with Christ and we're responding to the problems that arise with godly understanding, with patience, with insight. See, I think that would cause us to create an environment where, man, we couldn't wait to get home to it instead of looking for an excuse to get away from it. The fourth characteristic, or the third one here that we see in verse 4, is Solomon reveals that a house that's turned into a home is one that's filled by knowledge. By wisdom a house is built. Through understanding it is established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. Through knowledge, again, not just a gaining or acquiring of information and facts and figures. Through knowledge, through learning with perception, like you're absorbing it. Through knowledge, if you're going to learn anything, you have to develop a teachable spirit. Let me speak a little Southern for you. You can't learn anybody anything who knows everything. Y'all know what I'm talking about, ones of you that are from here. You can't teach someone anything who's not willing to be taught, who thinks they know everything. So knowledge has also the component of becoming teachable, being willing to listen, ever pursuing more and more truth or understanding. That is, not just finding out what is, but why. What is the problem and why? What is the issue and why? What is going on in my kid's life and why? What is my spouse feeling, thinking? Why? Knowledge is ever pursuing more and more truth, and then it uses that to act on it and make things better, to improve a situation. It sort of seems like we're coming around full circle, because when you do that, you gain wisdom and insight. You respond in a way in which is parallel to godly counsel. And as a result of this knowledge and experience that is gained and making the right decisions, you're creating this environment that feels more and more and more and more like home. And it says, and it is filled, this place that used to be just sort of a vacant space, it's filled with all kinds of rare and beautiful treasures. We'll get to that here in just a minute. But I just want to point out, for those of you who don't know my wife personally, she's an incredible decorator. I'll hire her services out to you for that if you'd like. I'm always out for a buck, But she really is. She's good at decorating. It's sort of like just a natural skill. She's got an eye for it. Some people, in my opinion, some people's idea of decorating, I just call it cluttering. It's like you walk into their house and every square inch of horizontal space has something sitting on it. I don't see any need for that. I used to be in floor covering, used to go in people's houses all the time. And when I would walk in and I would see what I called a bunch of knickknacks, I'm like, listen, you got to do something about this. Like, before I come in here and do this job, you got to take all these knickknacks and put them away somewhere, because I'll break something. I can assure you of that. But just a bunch of stuff sitting around makes me uneasy. Remember, I'm a bullet point kind of person. Others seem like they have to have every spot on every wall covered with something. Like it's hanging, pictures everywhere, phrases, all kinds of stuff. My wife, I would describe her approach to decorating as just very clean, minimal. You know what I'm saying? It's not too much, not too little. It's just right. But you know what I really like about her way of decorating? All seriousness here. It's personal. And she'll go out and she'll buy a few things off the shelf. But if you were to come into our house, and you're welcome to do so, invited, not uninvited. But if you come into our house, the eye-catching pieces of decoration, the things that really grab your attention, are going to be the personal ones. If you come in our living room and you sit down on our couch, there's a coffee table in front of you. I guarantee you, the one thing that you're going to notice is the only thing sitting on that coffee table, which is a rough-turned fruit bowl kind of thing. You would look at it and you think, what is that? A lot of people ask that. Wow, what's that all about? That is a bowl that my grandfather began to turn and never finished it before he died. Now, he would have a heart attack if he knew we had it set out for display, because he's just like that. We're all Bowers, But we set it out unfinished. Everybody that walks into our living room asks about that bowl. And then, likely next, you would notice, if you looked up toward the TV, off to the right of the TV is a cedar mantle that I made. And by made, I mean I cut it to length and put it on the wall. But on that mantle is a small black change purse, just big enough to put in your hand. And it's full of change. That change purse belonged to my grandmother. The money in it is all the money she had to her name when she died. It's leaning up against a small glass jar full of dried rose petals that came from the flower that I wore on my lapel when I preached her funeral. All of this sits under a nicely framed ordination certificate that was of my great-grandfather's back in the 1950s. You see, it's things like that that make our house a home. But what we need to realize today is Solomon wasn't talking about a physical structure. He wasn't talking about literal decorations or material treasures. What makes a house a home is the people. The family that inhabits that structure. The rewards that come from being the kind of people that God called us and created us to be. Living to our full potential that He planted within us at birth. By wisdom, through a relationship with Jesus, each person in the home will be built or built up into the person God created them to be. As we continue to grow, we will be constructed and reconstructed, restored and remodeled until we reach maturity. Out of that wisdom, out of that relationship comes insight and understanding by which they respond to and interact with others, helping to create a more stable and secure environment. And each one then is challenged to live a life of constant learning by knowledge, learning each other and how to live in better harmony with each other, learning more about themselves and about God who desires such an intimate relationship with them. That learning causes our lives and our homes to be filled with all kinds of, Solomon said, rare and beautiful treasures. What could those be? What kind of rare and beautiful treasures? Maybe it's the very things that if I were to ask you, you would say those are missing right now from my life and from our home. Unconditional love, happy memories, positive attitudes, right responses, words of affirmation, character, integrity, mutual respect. You see, if you have those things, if you've experienced those things, you need to be thankful for them because they really are rare. They're somewhat hard to come by. And if you have them, if you've experienced them, you know exactly how valuable they really are. And maybe you're thinking right now, this sounds just too good to be true. And certainly it does. This sounds like this is sort of a pie in the sky kind of place to live. But it is achievable. It is attainable. I want you to know something this morning, that God never Whether you're talking about in Psalms or Proverbs or anywhere else in Scripture on any other subject matter, God never dangles a theoretical carrot out in front of us just to tease us. He never sets us up with impossibly achieved situations like, if you could just have this. But you can't. He never once does that. What we've seen over the last 7 to 8 weeks is that God gives us a script, a blueprint to go by to achieve what we've always dreamed of. And so here's my suggestion for you this morning. If you would notice that your house is missing a few of these ingredients that would make it a home, it's easy to focus on somebody else and say they're the problem. Man, if I could just fix them, if this would just change about them, everything would be great. You could do that, but you're likely going to be met with resistance that leads to resentment. And not only are you going to be where you started, but you'll probably be worse off. So my suggestion today is start with you. Start with you. What is it that I'm missing? Is there something about me that needs to change, that needs to improve? Is there some reconstruction or remodeling that needs to take place in my life? Start with your relationship with Christ. Build upon that. Lean on the strength and the aid that you find from Christ within. After a few months, a year, you'll be amazed at the transformation that takes place in your home. It starts with you, but I'm absolutely convinced that the rest will follow. So don't stop today by just saying, I believe this can happen, or I believe this is possible. Start by saying, this will happen. My house will become a home, and it'll start with me. With every head bowed and every eye closed, God, you know our hearts. You know the intimate details of our life. And so we're asking you right now, if you would bring to our attention any area in our life that needs improvement. I was once told in Bible college that the one room that we will always have in our life is room for improvement. And I found that time and time again to be absolutely true. So God, wherever we need to do some fixing up, there may be some things that need to be torn out, discarded, and replaced. God, wherever you want to start, that's where I want to be. Some of us here, we're just starting out. Our whole life is in front of us. We're looking at the possibilities of the future. God, it's our prayer today that you would help us lay a very solid foundation. One that is centered upon and focused on our individual relationships with you. Knowing if we start there and build on that, then we've got a firm and stable, not just a house, but a home. So God, we look to building and reconstructing homes today that would bring you glory, that would bring you honor, and that would be built to last a lifetime. We thank you for this opportunity. To you be all the credit, glory, and honor in Jesus' name. Amen. We'll see you next week, guys.